Welcome to Master the Game. I am Juice, and today we are going to be discussing the 2025 Monster Manual and whether you should pick it up for your Dungeons & Dragons games. So let's get started. Stay tuned to the end of this video for the Day 1 Errata for the Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual. I was not provided the 2024-2025 Monster Manual free of charge. I did have to go and spend my own money for this so that I could review it for you guys. So just wanted to let you guys know that. Now, Wizards of the Coast, if you guys would like to provide free copies in the future, I would not say no. In fact, it would help me because then I could actually get a review copy up the day of release rather than 3 or 4 days after release like I'm doing right now. With that said, I did pick up my version of the Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual on Wednesday, a day after the early release, here in Lowell, Michigan, at my friendly local game store, Rookies Sports Cards Plus. It's a wonderful shop out here in West Michigan that's been in business for many decades. Great shop owner who does a lot for the community, so I definitely want to give a shout out here for them and thank them for holding my copy, so I was able to get an alternate copy. I've been creating tabletop RPG and Dungeons & Dragons content since 2012. In this time, I have reviewed a ton of Dungeons & Dragons content, among other things, including as far back as when 5th edition first came out, we used to do Google Hangouts with other content creators and discuss things like the new Monster Manual and all of that. So it is very exciting to me to be able to ring in a new chapter with this 2025 Monster Manual because, again, this is a whole new edition. New editions are kind of exciting. You're always kind of wondering, is it better? Is it worse? Do I prefer this over that? All of that. But before I get into the meat of this book, I really want to discuss the artwork. I like to start my reviews with artwork because it is the very first thing you notice and it leaves the first impression. So as you guys can see here, the cover of the new Monster Manual, the alternate cover, is absolutely gorgeous. The color, the choice of a Mind Flayer with its Mind Flayer tadpole, genius. This is probably one of the best monsters they could have even went with for this. I can only think of maybe a couple others that would have been great as well, or that could have possibly topped this or been equally as good. So again, great choice going with the Mind Flayer. The standard cover, I'm not as excited about. The standard cover, while still nice, I still think it's a nice piece of art. It's got Boo and Minx on the cover fighting a beholder, which obviously sets itself up for that wonderful quote from Baldur's Gate video games.
Go for the eyes, Boo! Go for the eyes! Rusk!
And so, again, I really think that's kind of a nice homage to the past, just like the other books, like Heaven Avenger and things like that. But obviously, I do prefer the alternate cover, as I do with most of these types of books. This alternate cover is my favorite of the current alternate covers for the 2024 and 2025 books. Some of the things about the interior art, I think they are really good. Some of them are a little small, so I do have opinions on that. You know, I really wish they somehow were able to make them bigger, but I get it. There's a lot of information. This is a reference book. The art is still beautiful. There's plenty of great ones in here. Something I learned because of the art was the Rakshasa with the backwards hands. Now, I know it's been in there in writing in previous monster manuals, and I don't know how I've either forgot or glossed over it. And I've even used Rakshasa in games before, like when I ran Descent into Avernus. Now, running a module is a little different than like studying the lore and putting things in there, so maybe it was easy to miss because of that. But yeah, Rakshasa, backwards hands. Who would have thunk it? Let me know in the comments if you think it's crazy that I didn't know that, even though I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons, you know, for 15 years. Would love to hear your thoughts on that below. But other artwork that I think is great in here, the Blob of Annihilation is absolutely terrifying. You know, to me, it's got like a skull in it. It's absolutely terrifying. Just devouring a whole town. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty cool, right? There's also this other this violet fungal growth here that I think is also absolutely beautiful and terrifying. Not a monster I'd want to approach or come across anywhere in the wilderness. So very cool there. And a lot of monsters, because of their artwork, look more upgraded. I'm thinking the Gibbering Mouther, like just seeing the artwork in this one compared to the previous editions, it's crazy how much more scary this thing looks. It used to look like this blob that would like go across the floor with like mouths and eyes all up in it. No, now it almost looks like it has like tentacles and can actually get at you and bite you. And again, it's just far more intimidating. Even looks like, again, it has some tentacles here. The 2025 Monster Manual has quite a few changes to the stat blocks. For instance, it's adding a section for gear, which I think is great. One of my favorite things about the new Monster Manual is that they include the habitat and what type of treasure these creatures might have at the very first part of each monster's entry. This is incredibly helpful for determining treasure that's dropped or left behind. It is telling you to go look in the Dungeon Master Guide for these types of tables, but it is still very helpful for brand new Dungeon Masters. Changing the way that the saving throws are presented up with these stats and the attributes. I think that is a pretty good adjustment that they have made. It's going to take me some time to get used to it, but I do think overall this is going to be a lot better. It's going to save space on the page, and I do think that this will help new DMs a lot moving forward. Some of my observations going through this book a few times now are that as you level up and fight harder monsters or higher level monsters, they are going to get much harder. Now, this was a gripe that a lot of people had in 2014, where just monsters didn't pack enough punch, and they just easy to kill. Things were just not that hard. You heard people say, "Oh, D&D 5e, the players are superheroes and they're not struggling," and it's easy to say when you've got certain classes that could basically in a round, maybe two, destroy a lich. Like, liches should be powerful, and in this they're a lot more powerful. So one thing you can count on is most monsters, especially as they level up, have more hit points, bigger modifiers, and stronger attacks. The Lair actions have been removed, which for me was a thing that I'm kind of bummed out about. I liked Lair actions and how they were in the previous edition. And it also was really nice because if you had weaker monsters, you were able to act after each player to use the Lair actions. So Lair actions are gone. You still have Lair effects. Some of the Lair effects in this book are brutal, like Looking at You, Draco Lich, and some of the others. But, heck, just Draco Lich can drain your levels of exhaustion and makes death saving throws. You have to make them at disadvantage, which I think is going to be a problem for a lot of player groups. You're definitely going to have some TPKs just because of that. Not to mention, if you are stuck in a dungeon and you're trying to get there, eventually your players might die from exhaustion. They do get a saving throw to fight against this exhaustion mechanic, but it's brutal. But they did take and try to incorporate Lair actions into just the normal stat blocks. So they gave monsters more abilities and legendary actions. And I wouldn't say more like, they tacked on a bunch, so you don't have a lot to keep track of. But they did add some of these things into there. With that, they also, if you are in your lair as a monster, a lot of them get buffs. Like they can do one extra legendary action while in their lair and, things like that. So I think that will balance out. And it's probably easier to manage rather than going, here's my lair actions, here's my legendary actions, not to mention my abilities. So it probably is an easier thing for a DM to manage there. I just kind of wish we still had some lair actions from before. Obviously, as a DM, you can do this on your own. You can add mechanics to a combat encounter, and all of that. Especially if you've already used the 2014 books, you already know these mechanics and how to use them in your games. So it wouldn't be that hard to do that. But New DMs obviously will have no idea about how that worked, and so they'll just probably run it more by the book, and that's okay. There are over 500 stat blocks in this book. There are some new monsters. They advertise it as they have so many new monsters. A lot of the new monsters are really just adding variants in the book. Now, instead of like 2 goblins, I think you have 4 different goblins, and things like that, which, again, I still think is great, especially for newer DMs. As a more experienced DM, you knew how to, like, scale things up and scale things down. So, again, I think this is a better thing for new DMs. Older DMs might not get as much value out of having so many variants. Either way, it is still pretty cool. I do like that it's in here, and I do think these types of books should be geared more towards beginner players and DMs anyway. So I do like that. Now, one of the new variants, or maybe it isn't, I wouldn't even call it a new monster, but a new variant would be like the Arch Hag. I do think that one's pretty cool. The Blob of Annihilation, again, very cool. There's just a lot of great things in here that are new to the core monster manual. So again, I think if you're just looking for new monsters, that's not going to be the draw, in my opinion, for this book. It's going to be the ease of use, the more effectiveness of the monsters that are in there, and things like that. But there are new monsters, and they're not bad. They're actually, I think, pretty cool. And they're more higher level monsters as well. With that, how many people play high level campaigns? Again, pros and cons, but again, I do really like it. Now, when it comes to the stat blocks and gameplay changes, again, there are quite a few. The NPC stat blocks are now mixed in with all the monsters in there. So, for example, you'll come up on bandits, and you'll have like 4 or 5 different bandit types. And I like that. Later on, you have things called tough or tough bosses. Tough is a stat block. It's kind of like a stack on. So it fills in for anything. Instead of having like orcs and Goliaths and all these things in there as different stat blocks, you can refer to something like a tough and make that like an orc, and maybe add or change a thing or two here and there. But ultimately, that is supposed to represent like bigger, stronger dudes that represent like a strength NPC stat block. Whereas you would probably go to like spies if you want more nimble type of stat block to represent like a drow or a evil elf or any kind of NPC that's going to just be more stealth-like. So again, that's one thing in this book that a lot of DMs are going to have to get used to. Rather than saying, oh, I want an orc, you're not going to get an orc in here. And in the back, it has recommendations for some of these things. They call them conversions, stat block conversions. And I know I've seen videos already saying, oh, the orc's not in the new monster manual. Correct. It's not in here with its own designated stat block. However, it is represented in here with something that is very comparable. You just need to tack on like the orc ability where they drop to 0 and they still have 1 hit point and are still standing. Like, add like one thing like that and it can feel orc-like. Heck, the old editions of D&D relied less on having so many variants, and it required the DM to describe things in a way that made you feel, ooh, this is different than that thing. It wasn't always reflected in stat blocks. So again, I think this is fine, and I think tweaking things to have a mechanical feel for your table, totally cool, and I actually don't mind that. So in this new edition, I do think the NPC stat blocks will feel far more usable than ever before, and I think it helps being dispersed throughout the monster manual. Some you might overlook if you don't know that they're in there, but ultimately I do think it's going to be better this way. The monsters in this book are a lot easier to run. For example, they have removed spell slots, so you're not going to have spell slots anymore. Instead, you're going to have spells listed. So the more powerful spells, like say you're looking at the Lich, they're going to have power word kill that you can use once per day. And they're going to have a couple other spells that you can use once per day. However, they're going to have other spells that aren't quite as powerful that they can do twice per day. Now, this isn't just pick 2 spells you can do from that category or 1 spell from this one for that category. You can use each spell in that category once per day, or each spell in that category twice per day. So I do like that. It's easier to manage. If you know you've used power word kill, you can't use it again for that combat, right? So I do like that a lot. Other things, like I said before, they got rid of the lair actions. They've really tried to tidy up these stat blocks so it's just less to manage. But with that said, they've not removed effectiveness. In fact, they've increased effectiveness of all the monsters, you know, and I really think that every monster now does feel unique. It does have abilities that I think are going to be definitely a nuisance to your players. And so I really look forward to seeing it more in play and in action. Obviously, I have not used these monsters yet in action, but I'm really looking forward to it as I have a game this weekend that I can't wait to use some of the monsters from this book. One example of how they have made each creature feel more distinct is if you just look at the dragons. If you look at, say, the blue dragon compared to the red dragon, obviously the attacks don't just have a different damage type, but these dragons also have spells now. So in this, though, the spells make sense for the dragon type. You're going to have a few different spells in there that are going to make sense. For instance, an ancient red dragon is going to be able to cast Fireball, whereas like the blue dragon has Shatter. Completely different spells. They work completely differently, but those are very good spells to have for something like a dragon. You're even going to look down in their actions, right? A blue dragon isn't going to use a pounce, but it has a tail whip, whereas the red dragon is going to have a pounce. Again, different mechanics. The way it works is different. And again, I'm excited to see how this works at the table. One thing that was also noticed is the Draco Lich. Like as I mentioned before, the effects while they're in their lair are far more impactful. I had already talked about that, whether it's the exhaustion mechanic or the disadvantage on saving throws. So for a CR17 monster that's worth 20,000 XP while in its lair, this is still absolutely brutal, and I'm actually really loving this. As I've mentioned before, there are additional features within the organization of the book. I've already talked about the gear a little bit and how you can get some loot from the gear and what is recommended. I do wish all the monsters in the monster manual had a suggested gear that might be in their lair, their nest, or that they'd have on them. Most stat blocks do not list out gear, so I do want to make mention of that. Again, the stat blocks look different with the saving throws next to the attributes. This is going to take some getting used to for me, but I do find this more efficient, and it does take up less space in the stat block. Whereas before, you used to have a line item under that would say saving throws, but it would only mention the ones they were proficient in or better at. So again, I think this is better. The book, as you have probably already heard, is 100% alphabetical. I do like this. It will take a little getting used to when it comes to like, oh, I'm throwing a dragon at my party, so I'm just going to flip to the dragon section. That's what you used to be able to do. Now you have to go into it knowing which color dragon you're going to use, whether it's gold, brass, bronze, silver, red, blue, green, black, white, whatever. You got to know which color dragon before you do that. When it comes to demons or devils, this is going to help me because I could not differentiate between the two. I know there's lists. I've made myself lists when I was running Descent into Avernus, and I still messed it up. So I do think being completely alphabetical is good. And again, the appendix will help if you don't know the categories in there. All these monsters are listed in the front of the book, which is also very helpful. So again, if you want to find a specific one, it's all listed in there, easy to find. I think it's going to be a lot better. The Appendix B, like I said, has all the lists. It has them listed based on CR. It has them based on the habitat. It has it based on the creature type. So you got a lot of different lists in the back of the book that are going to help quite a bit. And that is something they should have had in the previous one. I remember all of us doing our reviews for the 2014 Monster Manual. And within about a month, it felt like all that was taken into account because the website then put up all the lists for you to go download. I think I still have the lists that they put up there. They also did it for the magic items based on the rarity, but that's a whole different topic. There are big improvements over the 2014 Monster Manual in this version. Obviously, I think it's going to be a lot easier for new DMs. They did a great job in the front of the book describing how the stat blocks are laid out. It's got great sections about what each thing is in a stat block and how it's used. Well, all of the things in here are very helpful for new DMs. I think they did a great job. They could have put more lore in here. That is a negative about it, but if you really want the lore, there's a ton of YouTubers out there who create lore videos. I would recommend checking their videos out because a lot of their videos take the perspective through all the monster manuals, and they use other things for that lore. So if you want to learn about specific creatures, go watch a 10-minute video that one of these great content creators puts up for that. And again, I think it's still good. They still have some stuff in here. But, you know, ultimately, go get your lore elsewhere because it's just, they don't put enough of it in here. Again, the monsters in this feel dangerous. Again, this, to me, is going to give people that feel they've been wanting where monsters are hard to stop. And they pose a real threat to your adventuring parties. And that is important. 2014, the monsters were criticized for being far too weak. And I think this edition fixes that right away. If you're playing the 2024 Dungeons & Dragons, then I think you absolutely have to pick this book up. You're not going to regret it. It is far better than the 2014 Monster Manual. I've run 2024 D&D without this Monster Manual, and I think it did feel, like I just said, a little bit weaker. I think this is going to really make things more difficult, which I like. I'm sure you're going to like as well. So as you can see, most of the day one errata here is just some typos and minor changes. There's a couple modifiers that change by one. There's an AC that changes. But again, most of it's just a typo here and there. So nothing major in the day one errata. You can go and head on over to the Dungeons & Dragons website and download this for yourself. If you want to support the channel, please look down in the description. You can purchase this book or any of the other 2025 Dungeons & Dragons books from my affiliate link. I do get a small commission, but at no additional charge to you. It would mean so much to me if you would support me that way, or you can head on over to our Patreon where you can get some of my random roll tables and potentially play in a game with me. So I like to run games for my patrons, whether it's one-shots or campaigns. Would love to have you. So please, think about going over and supporting our Patreon. I hope you enjoyed this review of the 2025 Dungeons & Dragons Monster Manual. I am Juice. This is Master the Game. Game on.